Okay, good morning, and I think for some of you, good afternoon. Welcome to um, the BSMA Canaxis webinar titled From Lab to Life, Unlocking the Adaptive Supply Chain for Faster Patient Impact. I wanted to first go over a couple housekeeping pieces of information. First is a recording of this webinar will be sent to everybody who registered for this event. You can expect to see that probably no later than early next week. You can also find the recording as well as uh, other webinar events hosted by BSMA on BSMA's website. Next, the webinars, the video and chat have been disabled. So if you have a question, you should be able to find at the bottom of your screen an icon that says Q&A. So if you have a question, go into that Q&A feature, type your question, and Q&A has been reserved for the latter part of the webinar. So at that point in time, we'll get to your question. And I believe if there's more questions than can be handled, that we'll have a log of those questions that, if possible, someone will get to after the fact. Third, we welcome your feedback. So if anybody has anything um, you'd like to provide in terms of feedback, please email me directly. You'll see my email address below, bill@biosupplyalliance.com. And lastly, also on BSMA's website, you'll see a lot of information, not just recordings of other events, but information about upcoming webinars and joining our various steering committees and workstream groups. And last but not least, and I'll mention this towards the end of this event, there's information there about our upcoming annual conference and workshops on March 17th, 18th, and 19th in Foster City, California. So lastly, I'd like to hand it over to our two speakers, Christian from Canaxis and Praveen Vasudevan from Biorad.
Thank you, Bill. And thank you everyone for being here. Just a little bit about myself. As Bill said, I'm Christy Christian. I joined Canaxis about a year ago. My role is a senior industry principal specializing in life science. I came to Canaxis with about 25 plus years of experience in supply chain as a practitioner, as well as having spent time at Gartner as an executive partner in life science. So very familiar with the life science space and supply chain. And although many things have changed in that 25-year time span, one thing remains being very critical, and that's that making faster, better decisions is the one thing that has not changed and the one thing that I think is absolutely critical in today's world. And even so much that we can't wait to be 100% sure. Right? We have to be adaptable, which is what this is about, and be confident that we know enough to make a decision and we have the capabilities and tools to change if we need to. So with that, Praveen, would you like to introduce yourself?
Sure. Thanks, Christine. Good morning, everyone. Good afternoon to those elsewhere. I am a supply chain solutions architect and an IT manager at Biorad Laboratories. At Biorad, we support researchers and clinicians working through improved lives through science. We advance discoveries in the lab to ensure accuracy in the clinic. Our product can be found across life sciences, food science, diagnostics, biopharma, and all kinds of industries. We are about 70 years old and headquartered in California, a city called Hercules, which is part of the San Francisco Bay Area, very close to Foster City, where the next conference is going to be held. Our annual sales is about $2.6 billion in 2024, and we are a mid-sized company with about 7,500 employees worldwide. In my current role, I help develop IT solutions that supports buyer ads, sales and operations planning process. And my particular focus is on demand planning. I have about 20 years of experience in the industry, and I've spent most, if not all of it, in supply chain management, both in IT as well as in supply chain strategy consulting. A significant portion of this is in the life sciences and the medical devices industries. And I'm glad to be here today. Look forward to sharing my thoughts and engaging with fellow supply chain professionals and life science industry practitioners. Thank you.
Thank you, Praveen. So with that, you laid out a very complex environment that you operate in. And so I'm very excited for you to share, that with the people on the webinar, because it's really important that we understand kind of those challenges and those complexities and moving from where we are today to where we want to go to and understanding how we can navigate that. So in today's session, we'll discuss the importance of leveraging data and technology, and with your IT background coupled with supply chain, it marries up perfectly to that. Because really, we're looking at driving flexibility, adaptability, and resilience. The disruptions are not stopping. They're actually coming faster, and when they come faster, they're also coming with more magnitude. So we're sometimes still under that wave when the next one comes. So that ability to make faster decisions and adapt to what we know today is going to be critical as we go forward. So as we look at where we are today, it's no longer about solely optimizing for efficiency. When we optimize for efficiency, we at times introduce risk. If we think about stretching our supply chain so thin and having our sources single sourced around the world, that was an efficiency drive, but it's also a risk drive. So as you're looking at balancing risk, we need to look at, in today's world, how do we enable confidence and speed in patient care in a very changing, unpredictable world? In life science, our focus is that patient care, in delivering the best patient care that our products can. So when we look at that over the horizon and where it's going, there's significant changes. In addition to the complexity of our supply chain, there's significant changes to the industry, whether it's the therapies that we're looking at going from one to many to one to one, or cold chain. All of those introduce another level of complexity in a very disruptive environment. So as we start to think about what the transformation looks like going from traditional to adaptive, having kind of that lens on where we've come from and where we need to go to, I think makes a lot of sense as a starting point. So when we think about where we are, in many situations, we're still utilizing very traditional planning methodologies, which are linear, they're siloed, they're spreadsheet driven. And in essence, we spend more time looking backwards than looking forwards. And one of the analogies I use is, if we think about a car, there's a very big windshield and a very small rearview mirror. We should be looking forward much more than we look backward. And in traditional supply chain, we tend to do exactly the opposite. Our data tends to be older that we're looking at and trying to react to. And so by relying on that outdated data, we're really driving some decision latency. We're introducing risk. And what we need to shift to is, when we look at how do we continually build a structure, and I think you have done this within the Bio-Rad constructs really well, of we have to manage demand and supply volatility. That's not new, but the magnitude of it and the frequency of it is much more common now than it has been. We have regulatory and compliance pressures. Our product mix and our portfolios are becoming much more complicated and complex. We have mergers and acquisitions. So within life science, we see divestitures and mergers happening continually as we look at companies wanting to have some sort of growth and expand their portfolio. But there's also the geopolitical risk. When we look at our supply chain and look at how we've sourced all over the world, we need to be able to have a supply chain that's resilient enough to manage that geopolitical risk. So a lot of these are not new. I think the magnitude of them maybe is what's new, and the number that hit all at the same time. And so when we look at that, the disruptions are going to continue. And traditional planning, lacks the ability to be adaptive. It's just too slow. And so Bio-Rad leverages our platform, Maestro, and that we believe it provides that adaptability because of the ability to have concurrency. And I know you'll speak more about this later on, but for those not familiar with our Maestro platform, concurrency means that the data is always available and it's bidirectional. So we're sensing upstream and downstream. If I have a change in my supply, it's alerting my demand. If I have a change in demand or I took on a tender, it's notifying supply. It's forcing that collaboration so that you can assess and quickly respond to changes. So as we think about this and kind of laying the framework for some of the insight that you're going to share as we go forward, when we think about the life science, we see it in various ways. Where can we apply an adaptive supply chain when we're thinking about life science? Well, we talked about it before we started the webinar, the alignment between clinical and commercial supply chains. That is an obvious one where we can truly start driving that alignment to be more adaptive. When we're running a clinical trial and we need to change the demand, how do we do that in a way that facilitates the information passing to supply without it being spreadsheets or emails? Fewer shortages. So what are fewer shortages? They impact our service level. They improve customer sentiment. They improve our revenue. We look at less inventory. So supply chains overall are held to trying to optimize inventory. Inventory frees up cash flow for other areas. Adaptability doesn't ignore the inventory aspect. It layers that in with all the other capabilities. And so we like to think about this shift that's going to happen is shifting from forecast driven to signal driven. It's like a spider web. Something hits that spider web and it creates a vibration throughout the entire spider web. So we can sense what's going on. We want to go from that sequential planning to concurrent, meaning bidirectional, and from a supply chain as a cost center to a patient impact engine. So Praveen, with all that laid out, what pressures are converging at Bio-Rad that prompted the evolution?
Yeah, sure. Thanks, Christy, for laying out the importance of the adaptive supply chain to meet the challenges of today and the future. So at Bio-Rad, we see these challenges and are identifying opportunities in our supply chain to build this adaptability and resilience we're talking about. We all have witnessed the events in the last 4 or 5 years, right? So we started with the pandemic, and then immediately there was a supply chain crisis, and then there's this geopolitics that's changing almost on a daily basis, and there are so much more that's happening as well. Take the pandemic, so 2020, 2021, around that time, as for many companies, especially those in the life sciences industries, the gloves were off, right? The goal of many companies was, hey, let's go and produce at all costs, right? At Bio-Rad, we produce something called as PCR, which stands for polymerase chain reaction. For those that are not familiar with it, it's basically a method to rapidly produce billions and billions of copies of a specific segment of the DNA for detailed analysis. So think COVID, think all the times before we had the vaccine, and all that we wanted to do was understand what COVID did and what's the structure. I mean, what is it that we have to do to stop or help people from getting infected. So during COVID times, we had these PCR tools and purification tools that we made at Bio-Rad. The demand for those products was literally vertical, right? It just shot up and it stayed there for some time. 4 or 5 years on, now that we are here in 2025, that's no longer the case, right? The demand for those COVID related products are not as much as what it was back then. And so what's the net effect of all of this? The net effect is that the demand patterns have completely changed. We simply cannot use just the past to forecast the future. You alluded to a point earlier. If you look at what's the rear view mirror of the car through the rear view mirror, that's no longer enough. That's what we've been doing in demand planning, especially in traditional demand planning for a while now. And so what we need, and that's just simply not enough right now because the demand patterns have completely changed on us. Then came the supply chain crisis of 2021, 2022. And what ended up happening was many customers of ours started accumulating inventory to offset or to buffer themselves against the supply chain crisis, the disruptions in the supply chain that existed at that point in time. And the fact is, many of them are still in the process of burning off that inventory even today. And so if we start looking through the rearview mirror once again, all that we see is lumpy history. Our customers ordered a lot of products at one point in time. They no longer need the product today, but in reality, they are the inventory that they accumulated. The demand for those products do exist. The real demand continues to exist. It's just that they have so much of a leftover inventory that they're trying to burn off even today. That the history for us as an organization is very lumpy. And the net effect, again, is the same. The demand patterns have changed. We cannot use just the past to forecast the future. So all the traditional methods of statistical forecasting, time series forecasting, where we just used last 3 years of history as an example to forecast to see what we're going to sell in the next 3, that's no longer cannot be the only source of information or the only method to generate statistical forecast. It's useful to get a baseline, absolutely, but it's far from sufficient to generate a forecast to understand what we have to make and how much. This and many other factors acted as the catalyst of this evolution of having to move towards an adaptive supply chain from a demand planning perspective, at least at Bio-Rad.
And thank you for sharing that. And what you shared is not at all unique to Bio-Rad. It was symptomatic throughout many industries, and certainly across different companies in the life science industry. And you're right, there are organizations that are still trying to burn through the inventory before they have to write it off, before it expires. And so there's this balancing that's happening. And because that lumpy demand caused too much inventory at different points in the pipeline, it's now rattled the entire supply chain because the signals just aren't consistent. That volatility really threw off that norm. And so getting through that inventory that they have on hand is going to be critical to get that more stability and predictability back in there. So thank you so much for that. So from a Bio-Rad perspective, what risks existed if the supply chain decided not to evolve?
Yeah, if we continue to operate the traditional supply chain, if companies continue to do that, we're going to miss out on massive opportunities that are created by what's happening around us today. There are 2 ways to look at the world around us today. One, everything is going down the drain, or we look at all the opportunities that come out of this instability. And the life sciences industry in itself is, I believe, in the middle of a transition from focusing on economies of scale, making bulk reagents to cater to the needs of our customers, to personalized medicine, right? Yeah, moving from economies of scale to think about batches of one, right? A person is in need of a specialized therapy, and we need to be part of that supply chain that provides products to treat that unique individual, something to that effect, right? For example, most cutting-edge medical trials are life-saving in nature, right? Many patients opt into these as their last resort.
Mm-hmm.
The sanctity of the treatment is critical, not just to the monetary outcome. Now, it is directly tied to the life of the patient at the end of the supply chain. Organizations and companies that could guarantee the sanctity of the supply chain will reap the rewards through the life of the patent. I mean, think about the cutting edge medical technology that's in trial phases right now will get patented. And if we are able to be part of that supply chain, and if we are able to add value, critical value to that supply chain, there is commercial opportunity that exists throughout the life of the patent of the product that it's getting built, right? So the product, there's no, I mean, you can also think of it in a different way. There's no product that's coming out of the supply chain. The supply chain itself that we build is the product, right? So there's a high reward game that we are playing here, and we stand to miss out on a lot of this opportunity if we did not evolve at this point in time.
Exactly. And what you just highlighted was that shift from the supply chain as a cost center to the supply chain as a value driver. And it becomes absolutely critical in that. And when you look at the life science industry as a whole and the pipeline of new products, it is significant. This is not something that is just big right now and it's tapering off. The pipeline is significant and it's remaining significant. So this ability to bring that clinical and commercial and that flexibility and adaptability, building it now is going to serve you well into the future, as you said. It is a high stakes game and it's one for the long term because these drugs are going to be out there for a long time with more to come. When we think about the evolution of the supply chain, and we've all been in situations where we've looked at a roadmap or a roadmap's been laid out and they said, well, we're just going to do this one little piece first and then see how that goes. And then the next little piece and these small little incremental fixes. In your opinion, are those small incremental fixes enough or is there a different approach?
If you had asked me this question a year ago, I would have said that's probably one of the good ways to go about doing stuff because you have control over what you're developing, what you're doing, or changes that you bring to your supply chain. But the world we are in today, and the frequency of the fluctuating global and regional events, be it macroeconomics, be it geopolitics, it's so high. The frequency is so high that we just cannot afford to make only incremental changes. So moving to an adaptive supply chain is not a hard choice to make. It's very difficult to do, but it's not a hard choice to make because it's not a choice anymore. It's the only way forward that we have. And it's a good thing because if you have choices, there's the risk of making a bad one. Now you don't have the choice anymore. Let's try to get our supply chains to be more adaptive in nature. That's the only way forward. So from that perspective, what is needed is to get a sense of the relevant events and use that information to shape our supply chain. So it is truly transformative when we feed these leading indicators into a forecasting algorithm, as an example, to generate an output that is forward-looking, one that tells us what could happen tomorrow based on what's happening elsewhere today. We are no longer looking through the rear view mirror or rear view window of a car to look at what happened in the past, but instead we are looking at what's happening today elsewhere, getting that information into our tools, into the technology platforms that we have to generate an outlook of what things are going to look like tomorrow.
Completely agree. And you hit on two things that I want to highlight before we move on. One of them is outside data. So when we think about traditional planning, at best, we're looking at data that's within our four walls. When we think about how we have to be adaptive, you're exactly right. We have to start bringing in that information that's outside of our four walls that actually helps shape our data that we have within our system. And the other piece that you said that I think is absolutely critical is it's leading indicators. It's not lagging. And so when we think about how we traditionally plan, we're looking at lagging indicators. And that's that risk and that decision latency that becomes very prevalent. When we're looking forward, we need to be looking at that outside in data and those leading indicators. So thank you for bringing that up because those are absolutely two critical pieces that technology alone isn't going to make you adaptive. It's people, process, data, technology coming together into that way that it supports the organization to look forward. So shifting gears a little bit, when you and I were prepping for the event, you shared some stories with me regarding some of the challenges that Bio-Rad had experienced, kind of sparking that need for transformation to be more adaptive in the way you execute. You mentioned the complexity of Bio-Rad's product portfolio. Can you share more about that?
Sure. So, like I said, we are a global organization. We have manufacturing footprint in all three major regions of the world: Americas, EMEA, and APAC. Our customer footprint is global as well. We cater to our customer portfolio spread is roughly around 40% of our revenue comes from Americas and 30% each from APAC and EMEA roughly. Our China market within APAC is also expected to contribute about 6% of this total revenue. And I call out China specifically because some of the points that we're going to talk about a little later are going to, are around the influence of China or the impact that China has in the global economy. We operate both in the life sciences and the clinical diagnostics business, and each of these segments have different market dynamics. For example, shifting government policies around research grants, that has a direct impact on our life sciences business. Bio-Rad's products are staple in many of the laboratories around the world. And so if the laboratories do not have the funds to buy our products, that is going to impact us directly. Clinical diagnostics, on the other hand, is seeing a transition in the manufacturing strategy to cater to the personalized medicine, the batch of one concept that we touched upon a little earlier. Especially within the quality control products that we make, this has been prevalent. So it is safe to say that because of this complexity, because of the various industries and the larger groups that we work on, life sciences and clinical diagnostics, we cannot afford to have a one-size-fits-all approach to designing our supply chain and technology solutions. So even within our technology solution itself using Kinaxis, we have to have different solutions for the clinical diagnostics business, the quality systems business, as against what we do for life sciences industry.
That makes sense. And so with those different industries that you operate or sub-verticals within life science that you operate in, do you experience different degrees of variability of demand and supply? And if so, how have you adjusted to that?
Again, the events of the last few years have had a huge bearing on all of this, right? Especially in the variability of our demand and supply. We talked a little bit about the pandemic, the supply chain crisis, and the ongoing macroeconomic and geopolitical developments a little earlier. And I want to touch on a few of them in a little more detail. So there's something called as the biotech correction that we're all aware of. So the pandemic saw a huge capital investment in the biotechnology space. Now the investors are seeking returns and are more cautious about their investments, making it difficult for smaller biotechnology companies to get R&D funding. And so what it means is that if the funding dries up, it has a ripple effect across the supply chain. For allied companies in the upstream in that supply chain, this creates extreme variability in their demand. Then there's this academic budget cycles that we keep encountering. Shifting government priorities, high inflation have constrained academic research funding. And like I said, Bio-Rad is a staple in university labs, and reduced grant spending means it's an immediate lumpy demand for big ticket items like the droplet digital PCR systems that we make. And then there's a huge element called the China factor, right? Many companies are facing demand drops in China due to China's decision to move to a centralized volume-based procurement programs. What this essentially means is that we no longer will have the ability, or will have very limited ability to actually negotiate with direct customers hospitals and the likes in China. And instead, we'll have to deal with centralized organizations that are pooling in all of the demand from the end customers in China and negotiating with vendors such as Bio-Rad and other companies, other biotechnology companies, and they are squeezing the margins using that approach, right? So that's a volume-based procurement, centralized volume-based procurement programs that are in effect today. And by the end of 2025, China has already moved towards a fixed price model for hospital stays, right? If a patient, as an example, is admitted for diabetes management, the hospital just gets a flat fee. And if the hospital runs 10 tests using expensive imported reagents, it's going to lose money. And what does the hospital do in turn? They now have an internal incentive to use the most cost-effective testing platforms. And they move away from premium foreign brands unless it's absolutely necessary for clinical outcomes. And what this means is, again, for us and organizations alike, it is going to create inconsistent demand or variability in demand. Then there is the interest rate sensitivity. Life science industry in itself is heavy on capital expenditure. The high interest rates in 2024 and the previous years have caused many labs to defer upgrades. So this has led to kind of a coiled spring effect. There's a pent-up demand that exists in these labs that's our direct customers, and that is expected to release whenever the rates stabilize. And we don't know, we don't have visibility into when that's going to happen. But when it does, when the rates stabilize, the demand is going to flood in, and that is going to cause more variability, right? So all of these factors, and there are many others that cause variability in demand, at least for Bio-Rad and organizations in the same industry.
And those are a lot of different causal factors that you're trying to bring in and bring that visibility into your plan. And so that level of complexity on top of an already complex portfolio makes it very, very difficult to assess impacts and drive decisions. And then on top of that, we're going to talk about how do you balance the regulatory requirements with service level expectations? Because in life science, we all know we are continually impacted by regulation. And to your point, with patient-centric care as our model and our objective, there are those service level expectations. So can you share from a Bio-Rad perspective how you've been able to manage both of those aspects?
Sure. So conforming to regulations is non-negotiable in most cases. And if we do not conform to the regulations, we can instantly turn the inventory that we have, which is an asset, to a liability, right? We cannot sell a product that cannot move because we've not met the regulatory standards is a liability, and it's most likely going to get written off unless we find some other creative ways to sell that product to customers. There are a couple of things that happened in the last very recently that has brought back regulations has always been in the forefront of our industry, but it's highlighted its importance even more. There's something called as Biosecure Act of 2025 that was signed in December by the US government. Right? So they passed this act to restrict US-based organizations from using federal grants to procure certain items from designated biotechnology companies of concern. So they call them BCCs, biotechnology companies of concern. This means that many of the impacted companies will now have to find alternate suppliers. They have to find it now or in the very near future. And that's not an easy task. This is a significant impact on the supply chain, as moving to alternate, vetted, reliable suppliers in the life sciences industry is extremely time consuming. There is also part of the regionalization policy that many countries are moving towards. They all feel the need to be self-reliant in terms of producing. China, as an example, incentivizes organizations to produce locally, and couple that with the volume-based purchasing program that I talked about earlier, means that if you want to get the chances of you winning that tender goes up significantly if you are able to prove that you have manufacturing presence within China. And in a volume-based procurement program, the demand is literally binary. You either win the tender and win it all, or you lose it, and I'm sorry, you're out of the market for the next couple of years. Similarly, there is also this medical devices regulations by EU, which has been a major hurdle for companies in the diagnostic segment. You have to now meet significantly higher levels of clinical evidence. And what that means for many companies in the life sciences industry is that they end up doing what is called as portfolio pruning, right? We will discontinue, companies tend to discontinue older niche diagnostics tests because the cost of regulatory certification exceeds the value they generate. So it's a double-edged sword. So we have to be really careful about how personalized we get from our product portfolio perspective. At the same time, we need to have the commercial aspects of it in mind as well when we make these changes. So these regulatory changes have a significant impact on the patients who are at the end of the supply chain for us. If a critical reagent or a diagnostic component was sourced from one of these restricted companies, the transition to a new provider can cause a temporary drug or test kit shortage, increase the cost of goods, which eventually is passed down to the healthcare provider. And patients with rare diseases, so those requiring orphan diagnostic tests, are at risk. So as manufacturers discontinue these legacy products due to regulatory costs, supply gaps emerge, and that leaves some patients with fewer diagnostic options. So regulations play a huge role, and conformance is an absolute must.
Completely agree. And so as we look at that objective of having that patient-centric kind of objective of what we're doing within the supply chain, that's where our focus is. As you look at the importance of shifting to real-time data and connecting planning and really aligning functional areas to break down those silos, how did you and the Bio-Rad team leverage technology to support that shift? Because ultimately what we're trying to do is really have that data in one central place, have it connected, and have it visible. So can you share some of that?
Yeah, technology plays a significant role in moving towards real-time connected planning. That's absolute. There's no need to emphasize that any more than what we've already done. And Bio-Rad chose Kinaxis Maestro for its SNOP orchestration a few years ago. And we are seeing the benefits of that in our monthly SNOP meetings. And if I just have to call out on one simple but effective improvement that we have made recently is that we've increased the frequency of our forecast release to supply planning. You mentioned earlier how any change in demand needs to be visible to supply, and any change in supply needs to be visible elsewhere in the organization, breaking down the silos and all of that. Yes, this is one of the steps that we took. We've moved from a monthly transfer of forecast from demand planning to supply planning to a weekly transfer. And so our supply planners get expedite push-out notifications more frequently, and this allows them to take appropriate actions to mitigate risk. So yes, moving towards this real-time connected planning has been enabled by technology, and we are constantly on the lookout for what's next to make this even more real-time.
I think it's fantastic that you have changed the timing frequency of the data from monthly to weekly, and then leveraging technology to actually provide the planners with those exception messages so that they can react to it. So taking that thought and going a little bit further, gaining earlier visibility into risk and opportunity, can you give some examples or talk through, how did gaining that visibility improve collaboration and decision-making within Bio-Rad?
Yeah, gaining visibility is at the core of real-time connected planning. Its needs are accentuated by the changes that we are seeing around us. One such recent development is a move towards, that I talked about earlier, China's volume-based purchasing program. Right? Instead of now dealing with end customers such as hospitals, companies will have to work with a federal agency in China that aggregates all the requirements from the end customers. these submissions from the end customers are the leading indicators that our organization or companies in dealing with China will have to look out for. Take those submissions from end customers as leading indicators. Prepare the supply chains in the event they win the tender, right? Just like how you think about preheating the oven while prepping the ingredients on the site simultaneously. We want to be able to enable the supply chain to handle the volume spike if we win the tender, right? And one thing that comes to mind that we can do is having a set of pre-approved subcontractors on standby, right? Like I mentioned earlier, getting approvals, getting them meet the regulatory standards, making sure they're not part of that blacklist. It may not be practically possible. We have to enable that to happen. It's going to take time because we cannot practically scale up our in-house production in short notice. Another strategy could be to use postponement or delayed differentiation. Let's not build the final assembly that includes, for example, the Chinese language keyboards, display units, labels, etc., so that in case the tender is not won, that inventory should not become dead. We should be able to move that inventory and start using it elsewhere. So establishing hubs closer to our customers, that may get us a little bit of leverage. But beyond that, we have to do a lot of work, such as making sure that we have alternate suppliers, alternate manufacturing capabilities available on standby, so that we can use those in case the tender is won and we have to scale up our manufacturing. So those are some of the things that we can do.
Yeah, and you hit on some really important pieces. When we think about the efficiency topic of the supply chain, what efficiency started to equate to over the years was cost savings, right? How do we make our supply chain cost less in that cost center model? And in that, we went to single sourced. We went to sourcing on the other side of the world. We went to not sourcing close to where we manufacture or having that redundant capability in another plant. And you just hit on the importance of adaptability and resilience. Those two go hand in hand. When we look at being responsive, we need to be responsive in all of those lenses. And at the beginning of the webinar, we had talked about the risk associated with decision latency. And so from a decision latency, we have to take where we are today and drive that forward. So from a Bio-Rad perspective, have you seen decisions being made faster? And was there a bit of a confidence curve in the team as you went through this? Because part of making decisions faster is we tend not to be 100% confident that we know every single permutation. We don't have that time. And so was there some of that as well in your journey?
Yes. And thanks to the advancements in AI capabilities, such as the ability to configure agents that take action in response to disruptions in the supply chain, that's a game changer. We are not saying, I don't think we are there yet in terms of maturity, but we realize the need for agentic AI's infusion within the supply chain. And we are taking steps to enable that. So we want these agents to be able to assist our planners by giving recommendations on certain situations, to act on their behalf, to give recommendations in some cases, but to act on their behalf in other situations. So if we build on the China volume-based procurement scenario, if we couple demand sensing with the agentic AI capabilities, that could result in, for example, subcontracting POs or stock transfer orders getting created in the system based on whether the tender is won or not. You get visibility into, for a demand sensing model, as an example, you get visibility into what's the requirements that are getting submitted to the central organization within China. That helps us scale up, gauge what the demand is going to look like. And if we are able to get agentic AI set up we can actually automate or start getting some of the orders created, subcontracting POs created to engage with our new vendors in case a tender is won or not. So this is how we are thinking about addressing the need for speed and to have data-driven decision making coupled with speed.
And you mentioned the AI and the agents. Yesterday, I had the opportunity to build an agent in Maestro to identify late orders. And I have to tell you, it was absolutely fascinating to see how fast technology could find the data and then provide it to me as a planner to take action. So you're spot on. I mean, that is going to be a direction that we go. How do we continue to leverage technology? And then what are the capabilities of our team to take that data? Excuse me, and drive decision. So I see we have about 12 minutes left. So I'm going to go with one other question and then we'll shift quickly to a few lessons learned in the questions. So, are you seeing a shift in your KPI? And when I say that, I mean, we always typically look at OTIF or inventory, but is there a shift in a KPI to be more of patient impact?
Yes. So like I mentioned in the clinical diagnostics business, there is a general trend where we are moving away from large scale bulk reagents manufacturing to small batch components that support the need of personalized medicine. The supply chain for some of these products originate inside the body of the patients. It's called, I think the term that that's generally used is called vein to vein. It originates inside the body of the patients, then gets transformed inside sealed chambers, and then it comes back into the patients. If we can build a supply chain product, if we can build products that can guarantee the sanctity of the supply chain, then we could capture a significant share of the personalized medicine market. While this goes kind of against the models that we've built on economies of scale, it is definitely worth the investment considering the market share that's at stake. And now that basically makes patient impact as the new KPI rather than some of the other stuff that we've used to measuring in the past.
Completely agree. Okay, so given we have about 11 minutes left, I think we will shift to Q&A and see if there are any questions that have been posed from the attendees. Salma?
Yes, we did receive two questions, and I believe you kind of tackled some of them in the discussion, but I'll go over them. So, first one is around outcomes, and it's to you, Praveen. So, at a high level, what types of KPIs or performance areas have improved since using Maestro by Kinaxis?
Yes, for me, considering that my focus area within Bio-Rad is on the demand planning part of things, I would say one of the standard KPIs that we look to improve has always been forecast accuracy. Since we started using Kinaxis, just in the last 1 year, I would say our forecast accuracy has gone from the low 60s to very close to 70, 69-ish. You can call it 70. So yeah, so forecast accuracy has been one of the most important KPIs that we've worked towards in 2025 to improve using Kinaxis. And we brought in opportunity information from Salesforce. We've integrated Salesforce with Kinaxis here at Bio-Rad. And using that information has what it has meant is that planners are able to enter or come up with a consensus forecast that is better, that has better forecast accuracy than in the past. The next stage in our evolution is going to be, or where we want to go is, get all this demand sensing and the leading indicators into Kinaxis, into our forecasting engine, build models that will improve the statistical forecast output. And once that's done, we'll be able to see what kind of value add planners can bring on top of that statistical forecast improvements, the accuracy improvements that we see. So that is something that I'm excited about, that we already achieved significant improvements in our forecast accuracy in the last year. And we want to carry forward that journey forward with demand sensing.
Thank you.
And we're having also many questions about AI. So, at a high level, and it's to you, Christian, Praveen, you can both answer. How AI is being used today to support planners?
So I'll give from the Kinaxis perspective, and Praveen certainly jump in from the practical standpoint. So within the Maestro platform, we have AI already embedded in our platform where a planner can type in a question, and based on the learning, the machine learning that's behind that, it can give them a direction. So for example, they're looking for a workbook on a specific topic. So I'll give you the example I just did yesterday with that agent, which was with the late orders. But if I was a planner and I wanted to look for, what part is driving my supply chain or my supply issue, we can type that in and it can search into the bill of material, because within the Maestro platform, we have bills of material. So right now, as they're working in Maestro, it's structured around worksheets, workbooks, work instructions to keep them moving in the tool and not having a reason to go outside of it. We will be moving toward prescriptive and agentic. So taking that data, not only being able to generate that data and look and find that data, but generate some recommendations, with our vision ultimately being that agentic allows them to take decision. It's not autonomous in the terms of there is a human in that loop, because you need that human creativity in your planning. But where you have technology that can leverage data and leverage patterns, that's the direction that Kinaxis is moving, and we're moving there very quickly. Is there something you would add to that, Praveen?
Yeah, sure. The human intervention that you talked about is critical, and we recognize that within Bio-Rad we don't want to completely make things autonomous with agentic AI. So if the question is what tasks are automated with agentic AI, it's the recommendations that we give to our planners. One example that I'm working on at the moment is how do we aggregate our history, the levels to which we aggregate our history to be able to generate good quality statistical forecast. Our planners are used to planning or generating or aggregating history based on that, the levels in which they are getting measured. Say, for example, if I'm a planner responsible for Southeast Asia, I know what my paths are in my portfolio. So my stat forecast aggregation level is going to be at that sub-region, Southeast Asia level. So I'll aggregate all of my history to Southeast Asia and generate a stat forecast. This need not always be optimal. That you could still go down one more level to identify demand or aggregate history within the countries within Southeast Asia. Or if the Southeast Asia level is really bad, you could actually roll up a little bit more and go to the region level, APAC level itself. But imagine me being a demand planner and looking at the thousands and thousands of combinations that I have, and combinations of aggregations that I could do, and trying to figure out what's best without the help of a machine learning algorithm or having to do all of this manually. That's just not going to be possible. So that is what we want to automate. We want to have a machine learning algorithm that looks at our historical data, finds the right level of aggregation of the history that would make sense to generate good quality forecasts. Recommend that to the planner. Tell that, hey, you know what, this is what, this based on the data, this makes sense. Do you want to try and generate a stat forecast based on this level of aggregation? And if the planner says, yes, I want to do it, they do it. They say, no, I'm comfortable doing what I'm doing, that's fine. But let's not, we don't want to impose any kind of automation through agentic AI on our planners to do this activity. It's just recommendation at the moment.
Yes.
And I think we're just gonna take one last question, and it's around ACE NLP and how it's evolved. So it's to you, Praveen. What's changed in the processes or ways of working since Maestro was introduced and used by Bio-Rad?
Yes, we have since Maestro's introduction, the scenario planning capabilities have been used extensively by our planners and the SNOP organization itself. We have moved to a much more faster way of arriving at an annual plan for the next year using Maestro and SAP in collaboration than we have had done in the past. Those two, in my mind, come to the top of my mind when I think about what changes have we introduced into Bio-Rad as part of the Kinaxis implementation, and which ones of these have given us most benefit. So one I would say is the scenario planning capabilities, the what if scenario capabilities that are at our planners' disposal now, and the speed at which we do the shortening of our annual operating planning cycle every year. Those two are significant improvements in our SNOP processes.
Excellent.
Thank you both for answering all the questions.
Sure. Bill, do you want to wrap up?
Okay, I will hit share for a second. Okay, I first want to thank Christy, Praveen, and Salma for putting on a very interesting webinar. I hope the audience has has a lot of useful information they can take away and apply to their own respective organizations. As a reminder to what I mentioned at the beginning of this webinar, anybody who registered for it will be receiving a recording of this event. And last but not least, I wanted to remind everybody about BSMA's annual conference that's coming up this March 17th through 19th in Foster City, California, which is just south of the San Francisco airport. We're doing something different this year. We're having a full day of workshops on March 17th, which will include such activities as an AI workshop, packaging and labeling, IRT, something on QP, and global logistics and trade compliance, followed by 2 days of various supply chain related plenary sessions and panel discussions. So please go online. You'll see more information about this as well as information on register. I expect that some of these events, particular workshops, will get sold out, so don't wait too long to go in and register. So with that said, I'd like to thank everybody for joining, and we'll be signing off.
And Bill,
Thank you.
will you be able to share that slide, please, with the QR code of our maturity model?
Okay.
Thank you so much.
Is it seen or do I need to hit share slides?
Probably share slides because we're not
Okay.
seeing it. So while you're bringing it up, I'll just give a little preface on it. What Bill's bringing up is a QR code that you can scan and do a maturity assessment on 14 different functional areas. That maturity assessment will be sent back to you. It's an individual link that is given to you, and you can look at how you as an organization perform within those areas and which ones might be stronger, which ones might not be as strong, and how do you identify how to build that roadmap. So please feel free to fill that out and have the data sent back to you. And if not, maybe we can just find the code and send it.
Yeah, this will also be sent when they get the recording.
Perfect.
Okay, perfect.
Okay, so if that's it, again, I want to thank everybody, and I'm going to be signing off.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Have a great day.
Bye.
Bye.
Bye.